Good morning. Can you hear me? Good deal. Okay, well, welcome to the February meeting of the State Water Control Board. And this morning, before we get started with the agenda, I do want to have an introduction of the board. We do have a new board member this morning that we would like to welcome. So I will start down to my left and do an introduction of all of our board members. Reese?
Good morning, Reese Robertson from Grundy, Virginia.
Good morning, Scott Cameron from Fairfax County, Virginia.
Ryan Seeger, also from Fairfax County.
Robert Dunn from Chester, Virginia.
Michelle Johnson, Charles City County.
Mike Rolban, Director of DEQ.
Ross Phillips, Office of the Attorney General.
And Lou Wallace from Southwest Virginia, namely Russell County. So today, as we begin our meeting, before we get started, I do want to read the meeting rules. And we should have these about memorized. But anyway, here we go. Attendees may not erect any signage inside or outside the meeting room or the building. Attendees are not entitled to be disorderly or disruptive, or disrupt the meeting from proceeding in an orderly, efficient, effective fashion. Disruptive behavior may result in a recess or a removal from this meeting. Possession or use of any device that may disrupt the conduct of the business is prohibited, including but not limited to voice amplification equipment, bullhorns, blowhorns, sirens, or other noise-producing devices, as well as signs on sticks, poles, or stakes, or helium-filled balloons. All attendees are asked to be very respectful of all speakers. Rules will be enforced fairly and impartially, not only to ensure the efficient and effective conduct of the business, but also to ensure no interference with the business of the complex, its employees, and guests. Attendees wishing to record the proceedings are welcome to do so. However, you may not interfere with the business of the meeting, nor impede the view or participation of other meeting attendees and staff. No smoking is allowed unless in a designated outside space, and this includes tobacco and e-cigarettes. No alcohol, fireworks, pyrotechnics, weapons, or any substances, items controlled by law are allowed. No firearms are allowed in states' contracted spaces except for firearms carried by our law enforcement officers or authorized security personnel. All violators may be subject to removal from the meeting facility. Anyone removed from this facility may not re-enter. Anyone who fails to comply with removal may be charged with trespass. So thank you very much for listening intently for that. Next, I will call for the minutes. As we review our minutes, would you please, I'll entertain a motion that we...
Madam Chair.
We approve the minutes of our last meeting, November 30.
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion from any other board member? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion does carry. At this time, we're going to be looking at final regulations, which is the general VPDES permit for discharge of stormwater from construction activities. That's 9 VAC 25-880. You're welcome to start. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good morning. Madam Chair, members of the board, Director Rolban and Mr. Phillips, I am here to present the final general VPDES permit regulation for discharges of stormwater from construction activities, which is 9 VAC 25-880. The current permit expires on June 30th, 2024. Next slide. Just a little background. This permit is typically referred to as the Construction General Permit, or CGP. The permit covers the discharges of stormwater from construction activities equal to or greater than 1 acre of land disturbance, or less than 1 acre of land disturbance, but part of a larger common plan of development or sale. Next slide, please. Just to recap the regulatory procedure, the notice of intended regulatory action was published on March 28, 2022. We had 4 technical advisory committee meetings, which consisted of about 21 members, as well as DEQ staff from September 22nd, 2022 to April 4th, 2023. The notice of public comment and public hearing was approved at the June 30th, 2023 board meeting. And we had a public comment period that ran originally from August 14th to October 13th, but it was extended to December 6th as a result of some email technical difficulties. DEQ did receive 121 comments from 19 individuals and organizations. Some of these letters were on behalf of multiple organizations in one letter. And we had a public hearing on September 7th, 2023, of which we had 10 attendees and 2 people did speak. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through the comments that we did receive through the public comment period. The first is that the permit will not ensure compliance with water quality standards, no reasonable potential analysis performed, lack of temperature impact analysis, and failure to enforce existing permit requirements. DEQ's response to this is that the construction general permit is consistent with the EPA, the protection of water quality contained in EPA's 2022 construction general permit. I do want to note this permit was reviewed and accepted by EPA. EPA's fact sheet with their 2022 permit included an analysis of how their permit is protective of water quality and meets anti-degradation requirements. As outlined in their fact sheet, technology-based or non-numeric effluent limits are structured to require construction operators to prevent discharge of sediment and other pollutants through the use of effective planning and erosion controls, as well as to control discharges that do occur through the use of effective controls. EPA's permit requires operators to install and maintain stormwater controls, as well as they do have additional requirements for discharges to impaired waters for sediment-related or sediment-related parameters and nutrients. And they did add a turbidity benchmark monitoring for dewatering discharges to sensitive waters. Next slide, please. The CGP before you also includes additional requirements for discharges to surface waters identified as impaired or for which a TMD waste load allocation has been established and approved. It also includes technology-based limitation guidelines such as erosion and sediment control, maintenance of erosion and sediment control measures, soil stabilization requirements, dewatering requirements, requirements for pollution prevention measures, and also dictates prohibited discharges. Next slide, please. In addition, the state regulation includes minimum standards, which are achieved through the use of best management practices that are installed in the field to control and abate the discharge of pollutants. The state regulation also establishes requirements for the administration and enforcement of stormwater and erosion sediment control programs. Thus, no changes are being made to the regulation in response to these comments. However, we did revise the fact sheet to expand it to include permit decision rationale, including reference back to EPA's 2022 construction general permit. Next slide. We received some comments regarding the definition for qualified personnel, which is a new definition that was included in the draft permit. Comments indicated that the current definition proposed was unduly limits eligible training and certification options. It was too restrictive, and that the EPA course options should be removed. DEQ's response to this is that multiple training and certifications options are provided to provide flexibility to operators. The EPA certification class is already currently available. It is free, it's online, and we included it based on stakeholder input during the TAC meetings to provide multiple and low-cost options. DEQ is already working on our training certification materials, and we plan to offer them online at a reasonable cost. We did revise the definition of qualified personnel to include a certification from either DEQ or the Virginia Department of Transportation in order to provide even additional further flexibility. Next slide, please. We received comments that we should incorporate the additional language from the concrete wash water per the EPA's construction general permit. DEQ's response is that construction wash water requirements were identified very early in the TAC meetings as needing clarification. Construction wash water discharge has always been a significant issue on projects. So we obtained consensus from TAC stakeholders to address issues that have actually been seen throughout the Commonwealth and can be enforced. It is consistent with the intent of EPA CGP, and I do want to remind that this permit was reviewed by EPA and was deemed to be acceptable. No changes are being made to the regulations in response to these comments. Most of the comments that we received were related to the construction dewatering turbidity benchmark. They specifically recommended removing the benchmark completely and replacing it with a narrative or technology-based approach, requested additional exemptions and guidance. We received a lot of comments on this. About 9 commenters expressed concern, 2 actually offered support, and 7 just wanted additional clarification or guidance. First, this permit is consistent with EPA's 2022 construction general permit. The construction dewatering turbidity benchmark was added into this permit as it is required per the EPA's 2022. It's in their construction general permit. It is consistent with their permit, and I want to note it only applies to construction dewatering. It does not apply to discharges from sediment basins and traps throughout the site. It only applies to a construction dewatering discharge. If the dewatering activities don't reach surface water, let's say they discharge and they allow it to infiltrate into the ground, no turbidity monitoring is required because there's not actually a discharge. It also only applies to construction dewatering discharges to surface waters that are identified as impaired with applicable TMD waste load allocations established and approved prior to the issuance of this permit time for sediment or sediment-related parameters, or identified as exceptional waters. It is the turbidity threshold is a benchmark. It is not an effluent limitation. The exceedance of the benchmark does not constitute a permit violation. It acts as a warning sign that modifications or changes may be needed in the dewatering controls to improve pollutant removal and protect water quality. It includes corrective actions, and no failure to perform the corrective actions or perform the routine maintenance is what constitutes the permit violation. Specification details for the construction BMPs and maintenance requirements are outlined in the new handbook. And I do want to note that dewatering discharges from single-family detached residential structures are exempt as long as they are not directly discharging to a surface water. So that exemption does exist in the permit. Next slide. So in response to the comments we received, we did reevaluate. The first option that was in the draft regulation included a discharge collection point at the end of the discharge as well as in the receiving stream. And the allowable delta was originally 10 NTU, which we have now increased to 50 NTU. An option 2, which is taken at the discharge point only, we increased the threshold there from 50 NTU FTU to 150 NTU FTU. And we added option 3, which is EPA's method, which is based on a weekly average, and it's 50 NTU and FTU. And we also added option 4, which is an alternative benchmark option, which is also in EPA's construction general permit. And this allows an operator to evaluate actual existing natural turbidity in the field, submit data and samplings directly to DEQ. While this is an option, I do want to clarify that it does require approval from DEQ to identify that threshold before it can actually be implemented in the field. In addition to making these changes to the thresholds, we did add some additional language to the permit to provide additional clarification in the fact sheet about what constitutes a discharge and how you would take it would be implemented. Next slide. Now I just want to recap. We presented this map at the June 2023 board meeting. We had reviewed all 50 states for the status of their construction general permits back when we were preparing the draft regulation. As you can see on this slide, Virginia is one of the first states that is having to implement construction, especially in Region 3, having to implement the construction general permit. At the time of this research, 3 states had EPA oversight, 3 had turbidity benchmark, 4 did not have a benchmark, and 2 had separate dewatering permits that were required. DEQ evaluated all these, and we are now providing 4 options, which is providing more flexibility to EPA's permit, but continuing to remain protective of water quality. Next slide. We received comments regarding to Part 2F3 of the permit, which is specifically relating to repairs to control structures that are continuing to fail repeatedly in the same location. The comments indicated it should be deleted. It's excessive record keeping, and it would subject operators to a regulatory additional burden with limited benefit. DEQ's response to this is that this requirement was added per EPA's construction general permit. It does not require any specific correction actions. It only requires the operator to determine the location, if the control measure is operating correctly, or if it's indeed just routine maintenance. They need to go evaluate, review, and document the results in the inspection report where these measures are failing more than 2 times in the same location. We do want to note that implementation and updates of the stormwater pollution prevention plans are vital to ensuring adequate controls are used for the protection of state waters from runoff or construction sites. Therefore, no changes are being made to the regulation in response to these comments. Next slide, please. There were changes proposed for the 60 days to 90 days in order to submit a registration statement for continual coverage and notice of termination. We did receive some concerns from this timeline change, as well as concerns with the removal of automatic termination language. DEQ's response is there are currently more than 6,000 active permits across the Commonwealth. The change in time for permits that are automatically continued, where an operator must submit a complete registration statement from 60 days to 90 days prior to the expiration date, is due to this large quantity of permits and the required review and DEQ and local government capacity. Of these 6,000 permits, about 75% of them are actually administered by local authorities. With the registration statement submittals, they will need to be reviewed by DEQ staff, local authority staff. There will be collection of outstanding maintenance fees and overall coordination between the authorities and DEQ in order to issue all these permits. And additional time is needed in order to be able to issue these within the time frame needed in order to continue coverage, land disturbing activities covering active under these permits. Regarding the NOT paperwork, we increase the time frame because the paperwork that is submitted to the authorities and DEQ includes the review and recordation of easements, which takes additional time, as well as a review of as-built. Some of the projects that are being constructed have up to and exceed 100 stormwater facilities on these projects. And each one of those facilities their as-built need to be reviewed to verify the information submitted is accurate and correct. I do want to note that local governments and authorities have offered support in these increased timeframes. If the permittee regarding the removal of the automatic termination language, it was not actually removed. It states in the permit if the permittee has not received notification from DEQ or the local authority within 90 days of submitting a complete, so if no one responds back to your submittal of your application for your NOT, the authorization to discharge automatically terminates. So there is automatic termination language still in the permit. No changes are being made to the regulation in response to these comments. So I'm going to go now through some individual comments where one person made some comments, but we did want to bring those forward. We did receive a request to add language to account for recent precipitation and trends sites with history of major storm events and wildlife-friendly erosion control products. Our response is that design, storms, and frequencies and sizing of stormwater and erosion controls are included in the erosion sediment control and stormwater regulations and the associated handbook, which are all incorporated by, the regulations are incorporated by reference. These are where those need to be not in a general permit regulation, but it is incorporated by reference. No changes are being made to the regulation in response to these comments. We did see several individual comments with concerns on the revised definitions, as well as a request to add additional definitions. First one was related to the definition of construction site. We added the inclusion of water area was added to the definition of construction site, which is consistent with EPA's construction general permit. It does not change or expand the oversight role of the authority. The definition of construction support activities was added in the draft phase, and that was based on TAC input and based on the type of construction support activities that are used throughout the Commonwealth. The definition of final stabilization references soil disturbing instead of all land disturbing activities requiring final stabilization. This is intended because some land disturbing activities don't actually involve soil disturbance. So soil disturbance would be, soil disturbed areas would be the ones that would require the final stabilization as outlined in the definition. And the definition of immediately was not changed and is still needed for compliance. other definitions that were requested to be added are already defined in the state regulations, which are incorporated by reference in the permits. Therefore, no changes are being made in response to these comments. We received comments related to cleaning up references to approved plans and adding references to standards and specification entities and the list of people who get access to SWIPs, concerns with certification and signature requirements, the request to add construction, dewatering, turbidity monitoring to the items not subject to Part 3 of the general permit, concerns about language prohibiting the ability to perform at risk. DEQ's response to these is any requirement by an operator to submit documents to a standard and specification holder should be included in their contract or any other mechanism between these two parties, not in the construction general permit. And it is the operator's responsibility to comply with the permit, not a third-party consultant firm who is retained to perform those inspections or update the SWIP on behalf of the operator. The conditions in Part 3 are applicable to all VIPD's permits, not just specifically to this permit, and it is reflective of the state regulations. We did make minor changes to the language referencing approved erosion, sediment control, and stormwater plans that were prepared in accordance with department-approved standards and specifications for clarification based on the few comments. And we did add additional language to clarify that if the operator chooses to proceed with land disturbing activities without a plan approval, it would be at their own risk. And it's going to wrap up the public comments. They get a request to lower permit fees as well as invest in an electronic platform to pay fees, request for long-term maintenance responsibilities to be restored, and the request to provide a definition for area of development, which is referenced in the registration statement requirements. DEQ's response to these is permit fees are actually outlined in the stormwater regulation, not the CGP regulation. And I do want to note that current permit fees only cover about 46% of the program cost. DEQ has already started working on implementing a new electronic platform. And long-term responsibility and maintenance requirements were not removed from the entire permit. They remain in Part 1F of the construction general permit. The terminology area of development was replaced with area of construction site for consistency with the remainder of the permit, as construction site is what is defined in the permit regulation. So we did make that change. So moving on to EPA review, as I mentioned earlier, we did submit this permit to EPA and it was accepted. On August 29th, we submitted the draft documents to EPA. On October 19th, we received an initial round of comments with 5 significant concerns and some other minor comments that are outlined in the town hall document. On November 29th, this is all of 2023, we resubmitted a revised draft documents to EPA for review. And on December 6th, we received 1 additional recommendation. That was a recommendation, not a comment, but we did meet on December 19th to discuss that recommendation, and we met with them and determined that no further changes were required. So they did accept the permit after that December 19th meeting. So just to summarize all the changes that have been made to the final regulation since the proposed, in the general permit section, we've added language to include stormwater discharge associated with single-family detached residential structures within or outside a common plan of development or sale as an authorized discharge under the permit. They were not actually listed as an authorized discharge before this change. We also added language to clarify that for a small construction of a single-family detached structure, a SWIP shall be developed and implemented prior to the initiation of the construction activity. These first 2 changes were made as a response to EPA's reviews and comments. We also added language clarifying the required minimum percentage of vegetated cover and allowable bare area size to be classified as uniform for the purposes of final stabilization. Again, this change was made in response to EPA's comments, as well as for consistency with our new handbook. In the construction dewatering turbidity benchmark section, I've already presented these, but we increased the 2 original proposed threshold as presented previously, as well as added the EPA method option and the alternative benchmark option to the section. In the corrective actions section of the permit, we consolidated all the corrective actions when an exceedance of the turbidity benchmark occurs into 1 section. It was originally presented in 2. In order to remove the duplicity as well as provide additional clarification, we combined them into 1, so it's easier to follow. We also added language to clarify that once corrective actions have been completed, and the dewatering is resampled. No additional corrective actions are required beyond documenting the results of the corrective actions in the SWIP. And then we updated the unplanned changes section of the permit by adding language that clarifies when an operator proceeds with an unapproved construction activity while the plans are being approved, it is at their own risk. Do you have any questions? I know that was a lot.
Any questions from the board?
Yes, I do have a few questions. First of all, thank you for that very detailed presentation. Clearly, a lot of thought has gone on into this for quite some period of time. I was wondering, and I apologize if you've already presented some of the other documents, has the Virginia Association of Counties, or I think it's called the Virginia Municipal League, taken a position on this general permit? And
They did offer comments. We did respond back to their comments, and we did provide comment responses to all the commenters by email in early February. I believe it was February 2nd. And we did have a presentation to VAMSA to present the new benchmark options, and we haven't heard any concerns or response due to that presentation.
so the operating assumption is they would be comfortable.
That is our assumption. They did not express any additional concerns.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had, the 6,000 CGPs, can you give us a sense of typically what sort of activities are predominantly covered? I mean, talking house construction or commercial properties?
We haven't broken them down to that level. I do know about 75% are done by local authorities, and most of those are more construction or commercial, industrial, and subdivisions. DEQ also, we issue all the permits for annual standards and specification holders. So that would be your universities, all the VDOT permits. So about 3% of those permits are VDOT projects. So they do have a nice chunk of permits that they're probably the largest one individual permittee with a maximum that many permits. But we also have the Dominion linear utility projects. We have a lot of solar projects as well, which are your larger scale projects. So it includes all of those under that permit. But we'll be happy to break it down if you'd like to have that, but we haven't broken down by how many per type.
Right.
And right now our system is limited on how you can select it. So a lot of people put commercial, but it may be commercial and residential. So it's just how they submit the application.
Got it. And I was one more question, if I could. So at what point does someone have to get an individual permit as opposed to being covered by the general permit? Is there a threshold in terms of acreage or impact?
There's no threshold in terms of acreage. If it was reviewed and it was determined that they would not, for some reason, be able to be covered by the construction general permit, we could then evaluate the option to provide an individual permit. I will let you know, we do not have any construction individual permits.
Got it. Okay.
Right
thank
now,
you.
there are not any. It would take a lot of time to review and determine how to comply that specific. Most of the construction projects implement the same typical type controls based on the side of their projects, so they're covered by that general permit.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Very good. Any more questions or comments?
Madam Chair, I have one question. You stated, great presentation, by the way. You stated that you all were working on electronic platform. Do you have a timeline when that will be completed?
I do not have the updated timeline. I know that we're actively working on it. Okay. I don't know, Director Rolban, you may have the better time.
Sure. We've just started upgrading our Oracle database system, and that is projected the first phase is 1 year. The year after is when we plan to start the electronic permitting. We're using what's called OPAL, the Oracle Permitting and Licensing Software Platform. So we're hoping within 2 years to have that running on all the major permit programs. Okay. This particular one, just so you know, we've automated it already. So basically now it used to take 30 to 35 days to get this permit after the plans were approved. It now happens that same night electronically. So we've already done an automation just for this particular one. It's our largest permit type.
Thank you.
And we do already accept credit card payments. The biggest thing that most requests we receive is wanting to know what their outstanding maintenance fees are and what the tally is. So the hope is to provide that electronically so they're not having to call to ask that. They can just see it and pay it.
Anyone else? Do we have public comment for this?
We do.
Okay.
So persons that commented during the public comment period on the proposal are allowed up to 3 minutes to respond to the summary of the comments presented to the board. And we have 2 speakers this morning. We have pooled minutes. David Sly, Wild Virginia, has 6 minutes. And if we could get a 6-minute timer on the screen, please.
Good morning. Thanks for the chance to speak today. My name is David Sly. I represent Wild Virginia. A little bit of background. I'm a former senior engineer at DEQ doing permit writing. It's been quite a few years, but I've had a lot of experience in other states also with application of water quality standards and permitting both on the technical side and on the legal side. I've been involved in this process ever since the original NOIRA was issued. I was part of the Technical Advisory Committee. And I will tell you that I brought up a lot of issues that were never addressed during the Technical Advisory Committee. I asked for a lot of data that was never provided, in part because I think it doesn't exist. I will say that we strongly support the change that's being proposed here for the dewatering operations. We think it's appropriate and necessary to protect water quality. But I'll also say that it even strengthens our concerns about other problems from these sites. If a 50 NTU turbidity level is a problem for these kinds of discharges, if it's something that we need to monitor and possibly take action to reduce, it is also a problem for other discharges from these sites. And we don't understand why those shouldn't be and are not addressed also. Because of our concerns, we ask this board to deny the permit today. We think it can be improved and we can be made protective. I will say that the responses that I heard and the responses in writing to our comments, I have to say they're cursory at best. We provided really detailed comments on the technical basis, the technical concerns that we had. We provided the reasons why more analysis was necessary, and we didn't get it. What we really got from DEQ is that we expect that the requirements that are in this permit will uphold water quality standards. Well, that's not the way that an analysis works. They leaned on EPA's analysis, but that is not adequate for here. That's a nationwide analysis that ignores the fact that it's DEQ's responsibility and this board's responsibility to uphold its own water quality standards. A nationwide look at a general level cannot ensure that. It also ignored the fact that there are data that show that at least some, and probably a lot of the discharges from these kinds of sites can and do violate water quality standards. We presented a significant amount of scientific data, of studies that demonstrate that. One of those sources was an expert panel report on which DEQ personnel sat that looked at these kinds of discharges for the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And what that expert panel found is, although there's significantly or not nearly as much data as there needs to be, that the places where there were good studies for construction sites that have the same kinds of treatment that these sites are required to have often had huge levels of total suspended solids and turbidity, way above the 50 NTUs that we're talking about for the dewatering operations. We presented that. There's no response to that from DEQ. We also presented information on the scientific literature about likely temperature concerns from these facilities or from these discharges. It's extensive. When you do a development site, you will increase the temperature of that runoff water. And we have lots of trout streams, lots of sensitive waters where that's really important. There was no response to that issue. And I will tell you, they cited DEQ or EPA's fact sheet, which is extensive, but I've combed it every inch, and there is no address to temperature in EPA's permit, none. So again, we're asking this board to deny the permit. We think it needs to be improved. We don't think the analysis, we don't think that saying we expect something to happen is an analysis. An analysis is required under the Clean Water Act and under your laws and your regulations. So I'll stop there, and thanks for the chance.
Thank you, Mr. Sly.
We also have Patrick Fanning, Chesapeake Bay Foundation. He has 3 minutes to address the board.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Patrick Fanning, Virginia Staff Attorney for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. First, I want to thank DEQ staff for running a really well-done stakeholder process. It was quite contentious, especially on the turbidity issue, and I just appreciate DEQ staff for working through that and working with all the stakeholders to come to what I think is a pretty good resolution on that issue. We are largely supportive of the general permit. There's always room for improvement, and that's why these are iterative. But in particular, wanted to call out the improvements related to concrete wash water. We support those improvements, as well as the clarifications around inspections after storm events and the increased documentation for corrective actions. Those are all improvements. And then to the main issue, as you will have seen in the comments, the addition of the turbidity monitoring requirements. We support them. Just a few points I want to make related to them. First, it applies to a very narrow range of operations that are covered by the permit. It's only dewatering activities. So you will see that there was a lot of pushback to this in general, but it only covers a very small range of activities. Second, DEQ, as you saw in the presentation, added a significant amount of flexibility in how a permittee can consider turbidity and what methodology they want to use to determine whether there's an issue. And third, they added the benchmark exceedances. The requirements, if you exceed the benchmark, are, we support the turbidity requirements in general, but the recourse, if you exceed a benchmark, is just to go back and make sure your practice is working well. There's not even a requirement to install additional practices, which we hope to address in the future, but for these purposes, really what you're doing is just making sure that the practices you have in place are effective, and that's the purpose of the monitoring. So we support the permit in general. Again, we thank DEQ for working with us through the stakeholder process, and we ask that you approve the permit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
We do not have any additional speakers. I do believe there is a disclosure statement that
Yes,
needs to be
ma'am.
read.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I would like just to read a disclosure statement. I submitted to DEQ staff a signed transactional disclosure statement pursuant to the Virginia State and Local Government Conflict of Interest Act before participating and voting on this agenda item. I have a personal interest affected by the transaction being considered because of my employment as County Administrator of Charles City County. Charles City County, like other Virginia localities, has projects covered by the construction general permit and administers a Virginia stormwater management program. I am able to participate in the transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. You may proceed.
So staff recommends that the board adopt the amendments to the general VIPD's permit for discharges of stormwater for construction activities, 9 VAC 25-880, including the errata sheet. Staff also recommends that the board affirm that it will receive, consider, and respond to petitions by any person at any time with respect to reconsideration or revision of this regulation as provided by the Administrative Process Act.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I just want to clarify to make sure that everybody's aware that passed out with the presentation was a one-page errata sheet. you'll see that the highlighted changes were very minor corrections for clarity, and some were typographical. So I just want
Yes,
to make
we have-
sure that everybody had a copy of that.
We have that. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. At this time, I'll entertain a motion from this board or any further discussion.
My microphone isn't working well. Madam Chair, I move to adopt the staff recommendation.
I have a-
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second to adopt. Now discussion. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Any further discussion from this board?
Madam Chairman, I'd just like to observe that I think some of the items that our public commenters have addressed this morning would hopefully be addressed subsequently through at least in part by the HB 206 regulations that we anticipate coming out for public comment. I hope sometime in the next several months. That would certainly address at least the impact from utility scale solar projects, which were flagged by staff as an area of increasing growth. So I think that this is a really good step in the right direction, and I think we've got opportunities to make even further improvements going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. Anyone else? I do applaud you coming and speaking publicly, and thank you to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation in Wild, Virginia. It's very important. Okay, I have a motion and a second. I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to other business, which is not in your board book, but a report to the board regarding controversial permits. This is Prince Edward County Water Protection, VWP number 21-1912, Sandy River Reservoir. Mr. Morris.
Madam Chair and members of the board, I'm Scott Morris. I'm the Water Division Director for DEQ. Today I'll be going over Prince Edward County, the Sandy River Reservoir water withdrawal permit. Next slide. As just a reminder, by statute, we're required to give you periodic updates on pending actions where there's a controversial permit. The statute is on the slide. I'm not going to reiterate that number, but we will periodically be doing these updates as it progresses through the State Water Control Board meetings. At the next meeting, I'll give you a status update on the decision that's been held for this permit. Next slide. This is for Prince Edward County, Virginia Water VWP permit number 21-1912, which is for the Sandy River Reservoir. Next slide. I'd like to include a map to show you where this is. So Sandy River Reservoir is right there in Prince Edward County. You can see on the dot. And then on the subsequent slide, this actually shows you the intake and a little bit more zoomed in so you can see what we're talking about. That's the town of Farmville on the left, and then you see US 460 as the major roadway. As a summary of requests for a public hearing, I'm going to outline each of these and then go over a brief synopsis of the findings. The applicant has failed to demonstrate a need for the project. The need for the project is a regional water supply. If you look at the actual tiered structure of the permit's set up to do in a tier 1 an 8.83 million gallons per day max day withdrawal with an annual average of 4.79. And then in a tier 2, it's set to be 9.24 max day with a 5.01 million gallons per day annual average. The need for the project is a regional water supply, but also is based off the demand projections that purchasers of the water would be providing or requesting from Prince Edward County. Authorization from Nottoway County has not been approved to construct the distribution lines into Nottoway County. During the drafting of the permit process, this was tiered from a tier 1 to tier 2 to alleviate this issue, to allow for subsequent authorizations in the permit term And so the Tier 2 would have allowed the additional distribution lines through Nottaway County to add to that additional need for the project. Subsequently, there was some budget language changes that remediated the need for approval for Nottaway County, so that is no longer an issue associated with this permit. The town of Burkeville has no plans to have purchasing or developing an industrial park as described in the application. The actual town of Burkeville did provide demand projections to Prince Edward County and subsequently to DEQ during the evaluation period, and those demands are included on what their actual projections are. The projected water use is increased for the 3 state facilities loading in Nottaway County has no realistic basis. So there in reference to that is the DGS facilities. And again, those DGS facilities in subsequent correspondence back and forth between Prince Edward County and DEQ, we came to consensus on the actual demand needs. That's how those original values were structured for that Tier 1 and Tier 2 values. So that has been resolved. And an ability of the consultant to produce an independent, unbiased report on the potential threats the project may have on endangered or threatened and endangered species. So we did consult with Department of Game and Wildlife Resources and the U.S. And in conjunction with that, they reviewed the application and subsequently they didn't provide any additional comments. We do have time of year restrictions, and that's to allow in-stream flow to occur. And so that's during the actual permit term, not during the construction period. Next slide. And then Prince Edward County has failed to mention that the severe adverse impact to the proposal as written would have on the financial health of the town of Crewe and Nottaway County. DEQ reviews these based off of several conditions associated with reviewing the least environmental, most financial suitable alternative. The applicant did produce a document and we were satisfied with those documentations. We subsequently do not review the financial applicability of this or impact on this on neighboring localities. So that does not go into our decision-making process. The process for the work proposed by applicant has not met the environmental justice requirements and standards laid out in the Code of Virginia and Presidential Executive Order 13990. DEQ did have public notice periods and received comments from all parties, so we did meet those obligations, so that's not a factual statement. Prince Edward County has not been able to obtain funding for the project. It is believed that the proposed data center is the primary motivator for the entirety of the project. Again, when I stated in one of the previous comments, we did a very rigorous review of the demand projection needs for this project and concluded that we were satisfied with that. The financial basis or the funding mechanisms for this project does not go into the review process for DEQ. It is our understanding that Prince Edward County is pursuing options for funding, and that could be included in increase in tax rates, increase in utility rates, or going to the VRA for additional funding. There is a concern that the Historical and Cultural Resource Review did not go far enough in ruling out historical and cultural significance in the project area. There was a cultural resource study done, and that was provided to the Department of Historic Resources, and they concluded there was no impact from the study. And then also there was a general request for a public hearing, and we went through the review criteria for the request for public hearing and subsequently have approved a public hearing. Next slide. This is just a summary of events and decisions throughout the permitting process. So you can see the draft permit was submitted to the applicant on September 5th, 2023. Public comment period was on September 21st, 2023, and closed on October 23rd, 2023. DEQ did grant the request for a public hearing on December 27th, 2023. We have scheduled a draft public hearing for March 5th at Prince Edward High School at 7 p.m. That is for the actual hearing. There will be a 30-minute prior to that hearing review by staff of the technical project criteria. And then there will be a summary of comment public hearing to be scheduled after that public hearing. And we expect that to be probably late April and maybe roll into early May. And then a final action by the department is anticipated to occur in the summer of 2024. Next slide. I'm going to open myself up for questions or comments on information I provided. And just a reminder that no action is required by the board on this. This is purely for informational purposes.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Morris?
Yes, I do actually have one. Has Nottaway County Board of Supervisors expressed a view on this project, a formal view?
Yeah, so I believe that Nottaway County Board of Supervisors has, there's initial discussions with Prince Edward County to allow a distribution system or through their county, and they subsequently voted at one of their board meetings to deny that request. So there's a general opposition from Nottaway County for this permit.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to determine future meeting dates for this board. Ms. Porterfield, you got them?
I do have June 25th, 2024. It's the date that members indicated that they could attend. What was that date? June 25th, 2024. And it would be the same location, same venue.
Okay, mark your calendars. Next, we have public forum. And so before we start again for allowing public forum, you will be allowed 45 minutes. So anyway, members of the public may address the board on matters other than those on the agenda or pending regulatory actions. The total time allotted for public comment will not exceed 45 minutes. Those persons wishing to address the board during this time should indicate their desire on the sign-in card sheet and limit their presentations to 3 minutes or less. There is no pooling of time during the public forum, and each speaker's elapsed time will appear on the screen. Speakers will also receive notification from me, the chairperson, that time has expired. Ms. Porterfield, I do believe you have names, right?
I do. I have 6 individuals that have signed up to speak to the board this morning during the public forum. Would you like to proceed?
Yes, ma'am. And one more thing, just as a reminder, our first set of rules said no signs, et cetera, et cetera. So please adhere to our request, or I will ask you to leave and take your sign with you. So I'm just giving you fair warning straight up. Okay, we're ready.
Okay. The first speaker that we have this morning during public forum is Mr. David Sly. Mr. Sly has 3 minutes. Mr. Sly is with Wild Virginia, and he's indicated he would like to speak to the board about the Mountain Valley Pipeline.
Madam Chair, I would like to,
Yes, sir.
there's one for each of you up there and one for you folks. Sorry, Terry. I know you guys don't need any more
Yeah.
paper. But I thought it was important to give you some more information. Again, I'm Dave Sly with Wild Virginia, and simply we are asking the board to express its intent that DEQ take stronger enforcement action on Mountain Valley Pipeline to include a stop work order. The first document you have there with the photograph on the front was a letter that we sent to Director Rollband a little over 2 weeks ago, calling for a stop work order. I'll say we haven't had a response from that letter yet, but I wanted to ask the board to weigh in on this. And although I know you can't read all this, and I wouldn't ask you to right away, I'd ask you to just flip through and look at some of those photographs of the damages that are being done to water quality out there. Not just to waters, but to people, to property, to drinking water. There's some folks who have essentially had their wells ruined by discharges from Mountain Valley Pipeline. What we lay out in that letter is the reason why DEQ should be taking stronger action, because of degradation of water quality, and because we strongly believe that the threshold that's in the state code for stop work order has been surpassed, well surpassed. That requirement, or that threshold, spells out that if sediments are discharged off the site, deposited off the site, and deposited into water bodies, that is an imminent and sometimes real harm to water bodies. The second document you have here lays out dozens of instances where even the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has identified where sediment has been deposited off these sites over and over again. This just covers the period from November 26th through February 10th. But it covers many instances where that's happened. It covered other kinds of problems where they caused holes in the stream beds by their boring underneath. There have been significant problems with stream banks being damaged and sloughing away because of the construction activities. Anyhow, there's a wide range of problems that have occurred. Again, and I'll say that DEQ in their public statements on their website has misstated what their authority is. They've claimed that they can't take action as long as there are BMPs in place, even though there's the kind of degradation you see there, and that's just not true. And this letter explains why that's not true. So thank you, and I hope you will just speak up and support the folks out there.
Next speaker is Russell Chisholm, also speaking about MVP. And he's with POWHR. And if you wouldn't mind telling the board what that stands for, please.
Happily. And I have some copies. And we have some large format images we'd like to share with the board. We could get permission to bring those up. They're not signs.
We'll take that on your papers, but not on your posters. Sorry.
I'm Russell Chisholm, co-director of Protect Our Water Heritage Rights, or POWER, and a resident of Newport, Virginia. I regularly monitor Mountain Valley Pipeline construction activities near Sinking Creek, the site of a recent 10-day pollution incident likely caused by dewatering operations in the pipeline right-of-way as MVP board under Greenbrier Branch and Route 42 in Newport. Between January 27th and the morning of January 29th, 2024, the nearest National Weather Service rain gauge at Mountain Lake measured 1.66 inches of precipitation, significant rainfall, but not extraordinary for our area. What was extraordinary was the volume of sediment flowing up from the springhead, downstream from the pipeline work area, and dumping into Sinking Creek for several days before any attempts were made to stem the flow, despite multiple pollution reports made to DEQ. As a result, we continue to monitor this site and report to DEQ each day of continued pollution as conditions in Sinking Creek worsened until turbidity was measurable miles downstream. We submitted a total of 8 separate reports along with photo documentation, most of which were immediately closed as duplicate reports despite daily worsening creek conditions. At no point did anyone from the community reporting pollution receive a call or any follow-up from DEQ inspectors, and all of the communication seems to have been siloed among MVP and inspectors. This incident is not unique along the roughly 100 miles of pipeline in Virginia, but is rather part of a pattern that reinforces public perception that the project is self-regulated, self-investigated, and allowed to continue polluting with impunity. So we would ask this board to use your authority and your position as representative voice of our communities to thoroughly investigate the handling of community complaints dating back to July 2023, when Mountain Valley Pipeline construction resumed. We ask you to review MVP's own noncompliance reports submitted to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for incidents of sediment deposit off of the pipeline right-of-way and into Virginia streams and wetlands, and any corresponding action taken or not taken by DEQ in response to those non-compliance incidents. And we ask you to direct DEQ staff to provide to the Virginia Attorney General a complete accounting of the handling of community complaints and non-compliance incidents reported to DEQ and FERC, and recommend any appropriate enforcement action under the 2019 consent decree or as otherwise required by Virginia law. Should the board request additional information and testimony from directly impacted community members as part of a public forum, I would be happy to coordinate such a meeting, and my contact information is on the page.
Thank you, Mr. Chisholm.
Our next speaker is Amy Nelson. And I'm sorry, I can't make out the affiliation, so if you would tell us your. Yeah, it's, she's speaking about MVP as well.
Yep, I'm with Trout Unlimited, West Virginia.
Trout Unlimited, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Amy Nelson. I'm a certified water quality monitor trained by Trout Unlimited, West Virginia Rivers. I live in Blacksburg, and I monitor weekly 15 sites along the MVP route in Montgomery and Giles counties. And your handout details the comments I'm making here. Since last summer, more than 80 pollution reports have been filed with DEQ about the pipeline. I've personally filed 12 of those. They all document clear violations of water quality standards. These include failures of erosion and sediment control measures, causing muddy sediment from the pipeline right away to enter creeks and wetlands, construction debris completely clogging a stream, turbid water being dewatered back into a stream over several weeks, and muddy sediment from a spring contaminated by the pipeline entering Sinking Creek and polluting it several miles downstream. I fear the cumulative effects of the dewatering operations into Sinking Creek by the Mountain Lake Crossing have damaged the health of this once pristine trout stream, which is also suitable candy darter habitat. I documented these events with photographs and relevant water quality measurements such as turbidity and conductivity levels. When appropriate, I compared the affected location to one just upstream from the MVP crossing. The DEQ inspector dismissed every report. The closure comment varied from a cryptic circular phrase like, the E&S controls are properly installed, therefore they are working properly, to filters are removing heavy sediment, releasing only turbid water into the stream, to MVP verified that the release of turbid water has been stopped, which of course contradicts the previous assertion that discharging turbid water was okay. Or, most frequently, duplicate report, which means no comment, even when the report specifies that it documents additional pollution to whatever might be referenced in another report. DEQ's failure to enforce the conditions of the VWP permit and hold MVP accountable for violations has emboldened MVP to flout those regulations. In the most recent incident, muddy sediment from a polluted spring ran unimpeded into Sinking Creek for 5 full days before the company mobilized to mitigate the damage. At that point, the sediment plume had extended more than 5 miles downstream. DEQ's website says its mission is to protect the Commonwealth's natural resources, not just by issuing permits, but by conducting monitoring and inspections and enforcing the law. It is a state agency funded by the tax dollars of every community in this pipeline's path. Please ask DEQ to do its job and enforce the standards that protect our most precious resource, our water. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes, ma'am. We have Crystal, and I'm not sure about the last name. It's maybe Mello. Could you tell us your last name?
Mello.
It is Mello. Thank you.
Mello like Jello. Thank you for having this and allowing us to speak here today. I did not write anything down like everybody else gave with because I'm sure they have given you good information. I live along the path. I've made complaints, not excessive complaints, where I'm literally watching the sedimentation in wetlands and being responded to by John McClutchin that no sedimentation, depositation, I'm not even sure how to say the word, was noted, and I have the pictures of it. the water running off their work site straight into the Roanoke River, across a road, down a hill, into the Roanoke River. And I just feel that I've always thought, like, this would be taken care of. People would protect us. They would watch our waters. I'm coming to you as a mother, as a grandmother who has enjoyed flipping rocks with my grandchildren, to look at the different things that live under these rocks, to teach them about life. These things are being taken away, and it may just be a little bit of sedimentation here or a little bit there. It's adding up. What's happening at Sinking Creek is a crime. Animals, these precious little bits of life will not survive. The bigger animals will not be able to have a meal in the coming months to sprout and spawn and do their thing that makes people like me in Southwest Virginia happy to be able to hunt and fish. We don't go on vacations overseas or anything. This is our vacation spot. This is where we live. We all try to protect it as much as we can. And when we can't strap down to equipment to try to stop Mountain Valley Pipeline from working, that's where we depend on the DEQ to do their job and say, hey, this isn't right. It feels like they have given all the green light just to do whatever they want to do, and people are taking action. People are trying to stop this project because they know it's horrible. People are going to jail trying to stop them from destroying where we live, play, eat, all these things. This project, it will add up over years. This sedimentation that's happening right now will continue to happen. It will keep building up. Sinking Creek will no longer, DEQ has taken the Sinking Creek Bridge off of their website now. That used to be, the picture on their Facebook was that creek, and it's been taken off now. And why? Because people were upset. Even DEQ thought that that was a beautiful place to put on their Facebook website, and it's gone. You have another picture up there now. So I'm begging you, as a human, as a mother, as a grandmother, to please give them a violation. Do something. Don't let us feel like all this work that we're doing to try to protect what y'all grew up wanting to protect. I can only imagine you're here in this job because you loved nature. So please help us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mello.
Joshua Vanna with Artivism, Virginia. Speaking on MVP.
My name is Joshua Vanna. I'm Director of Artivism Virginia, Albemarle County. I stand here in solidarity with frontline communities fighting the Mountain Valley Pipeline. July will mark 10 full years of resistance, and we're still here, not going away. I'm going to read an abbreviated version of the statement that's in front of you from Seferina Olivo, Mountain Valley Watch Coordinator in Southwest Virginia, one of many people who could not be here today and make a 4-hour drive on a Friday morning. Paraphrase the first paragraph here, but Seferina indicates to the State Water Control Board members that there is a gap in monitoring and enforcement where DEQ should be. They were nowhere to be found. That gap is being filled by people along the route, landowners, allies, volunteers, finding the time to monitor the crimes that are being committed by the Mountain Valley Pipeline, should DEQ choose to acknowledge them or not. Our enlarged photographs back here, not signs, the photographs in David Sly's materials depict crimes. From Seferina says, I want to express my concern about the lack of response, communication, and transparency from the DEQ with Virginia landowners and community members impacted by the MVP. For the last 4 months, communities have endured the degradation of their streams, properties, and drinking water sources, yet the DEQ has remained largely unresponsive. This lack of communication, transparency, and support is unacceptable. I want to highlight the sedimentation issues happening in Roanoke County and Mill Creek, Bottom Creek, the Blackwater River, and Mill Creek. These streams are headwaters for primary drinking water sources and are regularly being reported for sedimentation and poor water quality. For months, these streams have had sediments from MVP construction pollute their ecology, yet the DEQ has essentially done nothing. To better understand this, I've compiled every DEQ report made concerning the MVP since its initial construction in 2018. By creating a comprehensive record and timeline of DEQ's responses to MVP's clear environmental abuse, it is clear that since construction restarted in the summer of 23, the DEQ has not taken enforcement against clear environmental violations. In this extensive record, I found that the DEQ takes on average 4 days to close a report. By the time DEQ is even inspecting these pollution incidents, they have already magnified in damage and reach. I'm deeply troubled by the impact that these issues have on the environment and the health of residents. Ceferino requests a meeting between the DEQ and State Water Control Board to discuss the recent pollution events as well as extensive record of the DEQ's negligence with MVP. These matters are too significant and complex for timed public comment and necessitate in-depth discussion. I believe it's important to hold this meeting closer to impacted communities, to ensure that affected residents can attend and voice their concerns and tell you what they're seeing firsthand. I urge the board to hold DEQ accountable for its failure to address critical issues and promptly address the concerns of impacted communities who are living with this transparently. Thank you for your time and communication, or consideration rather, no communication, consideration. It's a crime unfolding before your eyes, and if it's not stopped, if it ever becomes operational, it's going to kill somebody. And I don't think anybody really wants that on their conscience.
Thank you, Mr. Vanover.
Now's the time to stop it.
We appreciate your comments. Thank you.
I hope you do.
Our last speaker today is Jessica Sims, Appalachian Voices, speaking about Roanoke sedimentation.
My comment is also about MVP today. I'll wait till y'all have the handout. Jess with Appalachian Voices, delivering a comment on behalf of Preserve Bent Mountain today. Their membership couldn't be in attendance. They've shared over the course of months a series of photos and complaints indicating MVP's lack of care and construction across the board. In the packet you've received, you'll see the first 3 images demonstrate an improper installation of pipe in water with no support and with rocks visibly in the trench. MVP mud from construction hemorrhaged to the creeks of Roanoke County in late December and January. Incidents which should have been considered an emergency. They were ignored first by MVP crews and inspectors, and then by every government agency we contacted, including the DEQ. Preserve Bend Mountain is dismayed, along with so many communities, to be met with silence or excuses on what looks like clean water offenses. Photos 4 through 9 show the carnage of mud to a pristine, historic Pebbly Creek bottom and track the mud flow across the mountain as Bottom Creek turns west and descends towards the Bottom Creek Gorge Preserve in the Roanoke region. Residents sent photos on January 12th to several DEQ contacts, but the long weekend passed with sedimentation increasing and no response. Photo 11 shows Mill Creek in Roanoke ahead of sedimentation, what it is supposed to look like. The following photos, 12 through 6, show repeated sedimentation to tributaries and part of the Mill Creek watershed. Photos 17 through 21 show sedimentation settling to the bottom and banks of streams across the full plateau, from Bottom Creek along Poor Mountain Road through Middle Mountain at Mill Creek tributaries to the convergence of Mill and Bottom Creek. And you'll see a picture there where there's 2 converging, and you can see clear sedimentation and then a clear creek coming together. We're not aware of any law that allows thick, muddy discharge of groundwater from bore boxes, from trenches, from construction into our surface waters and our supposedly protected streams and watersheds. We ask for answers from this board and from DEQ. How is the overwhelming evidence of repeated incidents not illegal? Despite or because of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the public requires our public agencies to do as much as they can and as fully as they can to enforce law and regulation. At the 2021 Water Board hearing, Mr. McCutcheon told the board the mountains basically end at Bent Mountain. That figuratively erased all of the mountainous route through Franklin County, which is now under construction. We ask you to require clear and adequate answers from DEQ. Blatant incidents of sedimentation must be taken more seriously, and the community deserves to have responses and enforcement action from the agency. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Sims. Anyone else?
That concludes the speakers that have registered to speak this morning.
Okay. All these documents that you all have given to us, we will be reviewing, and I do ask staff to make sure they review, and if they'd like to make a comment some other time on some of these, we would appreciate that. Anything else from this board? Anything else from staff? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. I'll call for a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Madam Chairman, I move we adjourn the meeting.
I got a motion, I need a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you very much, everyone. We appreciate you.